again, just kind of a reminder of the agenda, we're going to talk about factors of good retention and deletion policies. Paul will be speaking on that. We'll talk about changing your default credentials and avoiding shared credentials, how to protect against social engineering and manipulation, particularly within the workforce, and then finally we'll wrap up with how to create an appropriate incident response plan. So I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Melissa. First of all, why are we talking about document retention and deletion in a program about cyber liability? Well, pretty simply, if you or your client, as the case may be, don't have it, then they, whoever they are, can't get it. We're not going to try and be comprehensive on this topic since this is not the main focus of today. We're going to kind of go through this fairly quickly. But I want to touch on some things that relate good retention and deletion policies to minimizing your exposure, both from a hopefully a prevention standpoint and also a loss or risk mitigation standpoint by way of managing your data. While this is not something that necessarily is going to be known, you're not going to put signs up, you're not going to advertise we don't have data. It's not like the delivery driver that has a bumper sticker saying driver doesn't carry more than $20 in change. But it can at least help manage the risk, and it might serve as a bit of a deterrent from people intimate with your data environment, such as employees, former employees, vendors, and that kind of thing. So one of the things that you need to first do is determine what your company's risks are when it comes to data. What data do you have that's at risk for being breached? Who are the likely attackers given the nature of the work you do, whatever industry you're in, the environment that you operate in? And what is going to be the most likely vector of attack? How an unauthorized person gains access to your data can vary depending on the type of operation that you have. So you can't really focus on the risks until you know what they are specific for your or your client's industry and their situation. So there are some simple analogies that can be done. By cleaning up your data, you can reduce the incentive to hack into your system. This is kind of simple. Don't keep a bunch of valuable stuff sitting on the car seat. Your car is going to get broken into at some point. You can reduce the potential damage you have if there is an intrusion. The less data you have, the less there is for an unauthorized person to access. And then hopefully you will make accessing your data more difficult. It may sound cliche, but it is proving more and more to be true that there are two types of companies, those that have been breached and those that are going to be breached. But if you can take some simple steps to protect yourself, kind of like covering the basics, locking your car, you're already taking tremendous steps towards reducing your risk of being breached or the resulting damage caused by a breach. So the first thing you want to do after you generate some sort of risk assessment and conducted an assessment of the data you have and mapped its locations, you want to implement a defensible life cycle for data. We have this idea that because data storage is cheap, keep everything. While the direct cost of data storage is low, it carries some indirect costs or maybe some future contingent liabilities, such as the increased cost of searching and using data, and that's not just in the context of litigation. That's for your employees. The more data you have to sift through, the harder it can be for employees to find what they need and for the company to operate. And of course, the more data you have, the more risk you have. So you've got to get out of this pack rat mentality of keep everything and essentially adopt a policy that eliminates data in a secure and defensible manner when it's no longer needed. It may be needed for a business purpose. It may be needed to be maintained due to an applicable law or regulation, or you may have some sort of contractual obligation. If the data does not fit one of those categories, why keep it? You need to take into account litigation holds in your retention and deletion policies, and you need to limit backups to their intended use. If a company has backups from 2 years ago they need to examine why they are keeping those. The primary focus of having backups is disaster recovery. If you have a catastrophic loss of data due to a problem with the computer system, if there was a physical disaster such as a tornado or storm, if you get hit by ransomware and you need to roll back your data to a prior time, that's generally why you want to have disaster data backup. Other than that, it is hard to justify under most circumstances having a year, 2 years, 3 years, or however many years worth of backup media. And of course, your retention and deletion policy needs to be reviewed often for revisions. Situations change, your computer system changes, you may become acquired, you may acquire other operations, you may launch new operations. The data you have and where it resides tends to change fairly frequently, and that needs to be examined and kept up to date. When you're creating these policies and implementing them, with the key word being on implementation, this may be a culture change for the company. You have to have acceptance of this from the C-suite on down. You're not going to get the employees to change the way they handle and retain data if it's not adopted by those in the leadership positions. Your system has to be workable. You can lock data down to where nobody can get to it, including the employees. Obviously, the business units need to be able to function and not spend all their time indexing or categorizing or accessing data that they need in the course of their work. The policies need to be comprehensive. Your company has more data than you realize. Once you start cataloging it, you will find that there is a lot more that has to be protected than most people really comprehend until they start to dig into it. Again, make it part of the culture. This is a multidisciplinary effort. It needs to include HR, your various IT departments, however large or small they may be, security, and that's not just computer security, but physical security as well, your legal, whether it's in-house counsel or outside counsel, your compliance, finance, because you're going to have budget issues, and so on. You want to involve somebody, and you may have to go outside the company, who is familiar with applicable standards and industry-specific best practices for the various types of data you have. If you need to reach out to somebody to get that skill set, then that's highly recommended that you do so. So, as far as relating retention and deletion policies back to the idea of cybersecurity, your policies need to involve access controls, and to the degree you can implement it, some sort of logging of who accesses what and when. And this obviously starts getting some budget issues that you obviously need to be cognizant of. But again, we're trying to do as much as we can to prevent, deter, track, and assess and remediate against any intrusions. Some of these access controls and logging may be required. If you have data that is subject to HIPAA or HITECH, other statutes, you may have Graham-Leach-Bliley requirements on you, depending on what you or your company, you or your client, what sort of business they're engaged in, and what sort of data they have. You may need to do this to get applicable trade secrets protection under whatever Trade Secrets Act you or your client operates under. Under most of these acts, if you do not take steps to safeguard the data, and that can include from your own company employees who don't have a need for access, you may have trouble availing yourself of the protections of the applicable Trade Secrets Act. There could be any number of other statutes. If you or your client accept payment via credit cards, then you're going to need to follow the payment card industry data security standards implemented by a group put together that consists of Visa, MasterCard, Discovery, and American Express. And there are plenty of businesses out there that do not know that through the acceptance of payment cards that they are going to be bound by those standards. And of course, again, you may have contractual requirements, such as a law firm having security requirements by its clients, imposed on them by their clients. Obviously, there are budget constraints. The more security you can afford, the more secure you'll be. But we do operate in a world where we're trying to run a business and we have other demands on our financial resources. Again, this must be a workable program. Encryption, to the degree you can adopt it, is a huge step. in your retention and data policy that is involving security measures as well. Don't forget about physical controls, access to file rooms, access to documents, leaving a client file out on your desk at night if you have outside cleaning crews come in. There are HIPAA issues there. Those people who practice litigation that involve injuries and you have someone's medical records spread out on your desk, that can be a problem. We are defending a data breach case right now that is on paper where somebody broke into an office suite and obtained data from medical files. You need to determine and control who can access data, under what circumstances, for what purposes, how. You need to have some measure of monitoring who is accessing what data, and this needs to all be set out in a stated written policy. And of course, determining how data will be deleted. It needs to be deleted in a manner that is defensible. Again, there may be constraints on you on how you can do this. HIPAA has some requirements. If you have to meet DoD guidelines or you are in an industry that the best practice is to do so, these are all issues that you need to look in and maybe get some outside assistance in doing so. Don't forget about weaknesses outside your system. Look at the user agreements of your vendors. Make sure that their system and their security measures are going to be as robust and as secure as yours, and as secure and robust as the requirements that are imposed on you, whether by law or contract. You need to, when you are looking at third-party vendors, such as maybe a cloud provider or any software as a service provider where data is housed outside of your company's environment, the review of that relationship and that contract needs to not just include legal counsel, but it needs to include IT and data security, because most attorneys are not going to know what the practical effect is from a security standpoint of the contracts they're reviewing. And of course, there's been a lot of news lately with the Hillary Clinton server at her house and whether she had any whether she had any data on there that's in an unsecured fashion. Odds are, and I don't have any direct knowledge of this, but if she was using a server at her residence, she probably relied on spam filter and control provided by her ISP or a third-party provider. Well, even if she is transmitting and receiving data that is encrypted, generally, for that spam filter to work, that data has to be decrypted, analyzed, and then recrypted to be sent along to her email system on her server at her house. That is a point at which data was unsecured outside of her firewall. That's a potential vulnerability. There's a very good chance that any attorney reviewing a contract with an outside provider may not have the realization that that contract is going to involve that potential data weakness. So don't just wade through the legalese of vendor contracts. You need to have your computer people, your IT, and your security people involved in that review process as well. And again, don't forget paper records. Our firm is handling 2 data breaches right now that involve paper records. All the buzz is about cyber and computer, and obviously that's where you have the potential exposure of breach of records numbering in the millions, but you can also have exposure and loss from paper records as well. They tend to be neglected these days.